You need to keep it cocked, almost like a chicken's claw. A ball pushed this way is so tricky that even I would find it difficult to loop. Alright, today we're focusing on service receive, specifically for forehand short balls. The side cut technique is crucial for both singles and doubles. I use it most often in my matches, especially in doubles. You can use the side cut to receive both left side spin and right side spin serves. If your opponent serves short to your forehand and you simply push it back, they can use your spin to execute a high, spinny loop, which is very difficult to block. Therefore, you must use the side cut to move your opponent and neutralize their serve. If you do this a few times, they'll stop serving short to your forehand, eliminating the threat. The first key mistake I see from amateur players is extending the arm too early when stepping in. Against a left side spin serve, the ball's curve will force you to retract your arm and scoop the ball. So, the first rule of receiving a short forehand serve is to keep the contact point close to your body. When I step in, I keep the ball close to my body for the push. If the ball is far, I adjust with my body, not by extending my arm to reach for it. If we open up our arm when receiving a short ball, we tend to push with a straight arm, which makes it very difficult to execute a quality, sharp push. So, point 1, keep the ball close to your body when pushing, and then adjust your racket angle based on the incoming spin. Point 2, since we are learning the side cut, you must never scoop under the ball. This will cause the ball to pop up, making it impossible to keep the trajectory low. No matter how much you press down, the ball will go high. For a skilled player, a high ball is a perfect opportunity for a kill shot. My advice is, for a backhand push, a flatter racket angle is acceptable because the racket head moves downward. However, for a forehand push, your racket must be more vertical. The reason most amateur players struggle with their forehand push is because they incorrectly rotate their wrist. Your wrist should be stable. The motion comes from the racket head moving down and sideways to brush the ball, not from hooking your wrist inward. When stepping in for any forehand in-table shot, you must first keep your upper arm close to your body. This action should resemble the small side triangle you form when executing a hook serve from inside the table. Don't just push with a straight arm. No matter how much you practice that, you'll still miss in a match. Instead, use a hook-like motion. The motion is, retract the forearm, then extend it. Notice that my racket face is kept vertical. Many students I've coached can't separate their forearm, upper arm, and wrist. For example, their arm straightens when they loop. They can bend it in training, but it straightens out under match pressure. The same happens with their push. At the elbow, you must maintain an angle between your upper and lower arm to properly use your forearm. In-table techniques primarily use the fingers, wrist, and forearm, with very little upper arm involvement. The reason pushes fail is often because the elbow and shoulder are too high. You need to drop them to create a stable pivot point. From this pivot, all your techniques, push, side cut, long push, are executed by the fingers, wrist, and forearm. If this pivot point is too high, your entire arm will be rigid, and your return will pop up into a half-high ball. When we handle short in-table balls, even for a flick, the elbow is always tensed and driving forward. It's not a comfortable or rigid state, but a braced elbow state. Only by using the elbow as a pivot can you achieve maximum flexibility in your fingers and wrist. Once the shoulder and elbow are down, the side cut involves brushing the side of the ball, not the bottom. The side cut method primarily uses a retract and extend forearm motion to create friction. It works against both forehand and backhand serves. As long as you can brush the ball, you can cut it to a wide angle. By using your forearm to brush the side of the ball, focus on sideways force. Don't chop straight down, as that leads to errors. Adding side brush makes the shot much safer. I sometimes add a bit of side brush to my long pushes to add more spin. In a tense match, pushing straight forward is risky and can go long, unless you just softly block it, which is an ineffective return. Remember, whenever your long push feels risky, add a little sideways brush. This will give you the confidence to be more aggressive with it. Brushing sideways, left or right, disperses the forward momentum, allowing you to use more power. Many players with stiff strokes make errors because they only push forward. Crucially, this must be a sideways brush, not a sideways block. A block will still send the ball into the net. The third key point is deciding if you want speed or spin. For speed, keep the racket more vertical and brush forward. For spin, raise your racket slightly higher and brush forward and downward. In doubles, for instance, I often prioritize speed, so I'll apply more forward force to make the return quick. If your opponent has a strong loop, and you want to add heavy spin, raise your hand higher and brush more forward and downward to generate heavy backspin. Generally, focusing on speed is more effective, as amateur players' footwork is often not good enough to reach the ball. But don't be predictable, combining the side cut with a straight push is highly effective. For example, in doubles, after the opponent serves, you execute this side cut. Their partner won't have recovered, leaving them confused and out of position. So, what kind of spin can you use this push cut against? It's effective against heavy backspin, side underspin, and no-spin serves. However, it's not for topspin or side topspin serves, those must be flicked. Now, let me quickly explain how to execute a no-spin forehand push. Let me demonstrate. The biggest problem with a standard long push is that a good opponent can use your heavy backspin to loop a high-quality, high-arc ball that's very hard to block. The more spin you give them, the better their loop will be. I've seen many veteran penhold players with unorthodox strokes who can generate massive spin with just a flick of the wrist. You can't just feed them heavy backspin. If they serve you a no-spin or light backspin ball, a banana flick is risky and a regular flick lacks quality. This is the perfect situation for the flick push. A flick push is fast, giving the opponent no time to apply heavy friction. The return can be a dead ball with backspin or a light topspin ball. But either way, it's at least twice as fast as a regular push. Its greatest advantage is that it neutralizes spin. For example, against a heavy backspin serve, a normal long push often goes into the net. But if I keep my racket vertical and brush sideways, I neutralize the spin. By keeping the racket vertical and brushing sideways, you bypass the ball's strongest spin axis and create your own arc, preventing it from hitting the net. So, if an opponent serves heavy spin to your forehand and consistently loops your push return, you should use the flick push technique. The key to this technique is to open your wrist and then thrust it forward from that open position. It's similar to Tai Chi. You gather energy, then release. Our force generation is the same, open the wrist slightly, then push it forward. The key is to thrust the wrist forward, not rotate it, and not to involve the upper arm. Let me demonstrate, open the wrist, and thrust it forward. With this technique, you don't have to fear heavy spin. The speed of this flick push is far greater than a regular push or long push. Your opponent will have a hard time adding spin to such a fast ball, will struggle with timing, and the ball's trajectory is deceptive. The sequence is, open the wrist first, then thrust it forward. Do not rotate it. Rotation will cause the ball to pop up and slow down. Watch, open the wrist, thrust it forward. Back in the Ma Lin era, penhold players often used their forehand to receive short balls on their backhand side because a forehand receive is more threatening. If you're using the flick push and want to add spin, thrust your wrist in a downward direction. If you want the ball to be fast, thrust your wrist forward. Remember, do not rotate your wrist. That's a fatal mistake. Rotation causes the racket to slip on the ball. The direction of the forearm is key. A downward thrust creates a backspin push. A forward thrust creates a fast push. However, be careful not to direct this shot too wide to their forehand. Since it has less spin, you risk getting hit by a powerful forehand loop. Aiming for the middle or backhand side is safe. You need to mix these up. If you only do a heavy long push, your opponent will eventually learn to lift the ball and add friction. You need a variety of receives to keep your opponent off balance and disrupt their timing. Pushing forward is a flick push for speed. Pushing downward is a flick chop for spin. This flick chop produces a very floaty, deceptive ball that wobbles in the air. I used this a lot as a junior player on short forehand receives. I didn't have the confidence to flick, and my long pushes often went out in matches. When your touch isn't fully developed, brushing sideways is a much safer option. The purpose of any service receive is to control your opponent. Don't just push and hope they miss, you must recover immediately for the next shot. Now, for the backhand side. Which is more difficult to handle, a short ball or a half-long ball? The half-long ball. The two best ways to handle a half-long ball are to wait for it to leave the table and loop it, or to step in with your right foot and flick it. But until you've mastered those techniques, you have to be patient and use the push. Many players are interested in my backhand push because it's very spinny. My backhand push is spinny because my motion doesn't stop at contact. A common flaw is finishing with an open racket face, which causes the ball to pop up and get attacked. My motion is in two parts. The first angle is the initial cut, but the second is like a backhand serve finish, where the handle points up and the racket tip points at the table. This allows me to accelerate the racket head through the finish, which is what generates the heavy spin. If you just push forward with your forearm, you'll either hit it long with too much power or send a weak, half-long ball that will be attacked. My backhand push is a two-part motion, a short, sharp impact for initial contact, followed by an acceleration of the racket head. If your push is just a linear motion, you'll miss long when you add power. Don't do that. Even if it works now, against a good player, a half-long backspin ball gives them all the time in the world to set up and attack. It's not a threat. The reason my long backhand push is so heavy and awkward for opponents is because my motion continues through the ball with a final flick of the wrist, which adds significant spin. Let me teach you this fundamental push, which works for both short and long balls. The first major mistake is that most amateur players collapse their wrist during a backhand push, which is incorrect. Don't collapse your wrist. You need to keep it cocked, almost like a chicken's claw. You must lower your shoulder and elbow, creating a V shape with a high wrist and shoulder, and a low elbow. If you collapse your wrist, any no-spin serve will be pushed high and get smashed. If you try to press down to compensate, the ball will go long. Collapsing the wrist is the biggest mistake in a backhand push. This applies to penholders too, who are even more prone to collapsing the wrist, resulting in high balls. The correct posture is high shoulder, high wrist, and a low elbow in between. You must have this structure. By raising the racket, you create space to cut downwards. If your racket is too low, you can only push or scoop the ball forward. Amateur players really need to practice their push. For anyone under an 1800 rating, the push is extremely important. I see many skilled players who will just make a heavy push and wait for you to make a mistake on your loop, or they'll block you wide. Older players, especially, should focus on the push. It's an energy-efficient shot that allows you to conserve stamina for crucial points later in the match. Second key point, don't use your forearm and don't let the racket head wobble. Keep the racket angle stable and use a dotting or tapping motion to contact the ball. This dotting push is the first step. Its purpose is to get a good grip on the ball with friction. After you make contact, the second step is to snap the racket head forward to turn it into a long push. When you combine these two motions, the ball will have almost no arc and be very difficult to loop. The resulting ball has a very flat trajectory and is extremely difficult to loop. The key is, keep the elbow and shoulder low, lift the hand, use a downward, dotting motion to engage the spin, and then snap the racket head to generate speed. The correct motion is a dotting push, the racket head drops, and the wrist snaps up. This works for both shakehand and penhold. A ball pushed this way is so tricky that even I would find it difficult to loop.